The year is 64 AD and you're standing inside the Golden House, the palace Rome whispered about but never dared describe. The air is warm with scented oils thick enough to cling to your skin. Somewhere deeper in the corridors, a woman breathes shakily, the sound sharp against the hush of velvet curtains brushing stone. You're not meant to be here. No one outside Nero's circle ever sees these halls at night. But tonight, an imperial attendant leads you forward, his steps measured, as if afraid to disturb the darkness. You catch a faint tremor in his hand as he lifts a lamp. Its glow reveals the outline of a platform surrounded by cushions, goblets, and shadows that seem to move even when nothing does. There are people here, 3, maybe 4, standing in silence. Their robes are immaculate, but their eyes tell another story: sleepless nights, swallowed fear, and something else you can't yet name. Behind them, the faintest sound escapes from deeper inside the room. Not a cry, not a word, a practiced exhale, as if someone has been instructed to stay quiet, no matter what happens. Your guide pauses. The light shifts, and then you see it. A narrow stage set beneath a mosaic of golden tiles, arranged not for celebration, but for exhibition. Every detail has been arranged with care, and every person in the room is waiting for the emperor to decide what happens next. Because here, in these private chambers, performances are not art. They are commands, and the noble women chosen for them do not step forward by will. They step forward because refusal does not exist. What kind of ruler turns human dignity into a silent spectacle? And why did Rome bury everything that happened inside these walls? If witnessing how power reshapes human lives inside Rome's hidden chambers draws you deeper into the truth, you're welcome to subscribe to Eternal Historian. Rome had welcomed Nero with a strange mixture of hope and unease. When he inherited the throne at 17, many believed his youth might calm an empire worn down by intrigue. His mother, Agrippina the Younger, moved quickly to secure her influence, surrounding him with advisors, guarding access to him, and shaping early decisions. She imagined a pliable ruler who would follow her direction, while the philosopher Seneca worked to guide the young emperor toward moderation. For a brief moment, Rome appeared steady, held in place by 2 powerful voices competing for Nero's loyalty. That balance collapsed quickly. Nero resented control, and once he understood the weight of the imperial title, he shed restraint with startling speed. Freed from the discipline Seneca tried to instill, he began crafting a world that reflected his tastes: spectacle, indulgence, and a fascination with dominance. The empire, already accustomed to lavish festivals and public games, now drifted towards something more theatrical, where the ruler's personal desires shaped the rhythm of daily life. Rome's elite followed these changes with forced smiles. Senators and wealthy families learned to read the emperor's moods as carefully as they studied political decrees. Publicly, they praised his performances, his races, his extravagant banquets. Privately, they feared the growing volatility of a leader who believed the empire existed to entertain him. In this environment, noblewomen found themselves in an especially precarious position. Their marriages, estates, and reputations were deeply tied to politics, making them valuable pieces in a game they did not control. By tradition, aristocratic women were shields for alliances, symbols of honor, and quiet negotiators inside families. But under Nero, their symbolic worth took a darker turn. He realized that targeting them, summoning them, isolating them, bind. Aurelia Sabina had grown up in a household where every gesture carried political weight. Her father, a principled senator, had challenged Nero's latest tax reform, believing it would burden Rome's poorest citizens. The disagreement earned him quiet enemies, and his daughter became an easy target for imperial pressure. Aurelia kept her composure in public, but on the night she was summoned, she clutched a small silver ring engraved with her family crest. It was a reminder of the world she belonged to, one she understood might slip away the moment she crossed the palace threshold. Livia Domitilla entered Nero's orbit through a different kind of vulnerability. Recently widowed, she inherited an expansive estate near Praeneste, a property Nero coveted for its fertile fields and strategic location. With no husband to shield her and few political allies willing to intervene, she found herself exposed to the emperor's attention. Livia carried with her a pale blue scarf her late husband had given her during a festival. As she was escorted through the palace gates, she held the fabric close, tracing its worn edges as if the familiar texture could anchor her against the uncertainty ahead. Claudia Galleria came from a lineage known for its strict discipline and outspoken pride. Tales of her beauty traveled quickly through Rome, though she avoided the social circles that thrived on gossip. Her family had refused several imperial requests to join Nero's private gatherings, believing their daughter's dignity would not survive the environment. That defiance made her stand out. When the summons finally arrived, Claudia wore a gold necklace passed down from her grandmother, the only heirloom she had been allowed to bring. The cool weight of the metal against her collarbone reminded her of the strength expected of her, even when she felt none. Among the women taken during this period, he remained unnamed in surviving accounts. Historians preserved her silence out of respect for a family that endured heavy losses under Nero's rule. She was believed to be very young, perhaps newly married or recently pledged to a noble household. As she traveled toward the Golden House, she whispered a brief prayer under her breath, hoping that someone, anyone, might hear it. Her identity was erased from documents, but the faint echo of her presence lingers through small references scattered in letters written by frightened senators who dared not record more. These women represented different corners of Rome's elite: political challenge, economic vulnerability, family pride, and quiet anonymity. Yet all were drawn into the same expanding shadow as an emperor who saw their lives not as sacred ties within their households, but as tools to manipulate a city that feared his slightest impulse. The law had grown teeth. What once read as protocol or imperial courtesy became a mechanism for extraction. An invitation from the palace carried an authority indistinguishable from command. Administrators who had once interpreted statutes turned quiet when the emperor's seal burned into a parchment. To challenge a summons was to risk more than a reputation. Under the guise of legal formality, private households were compelled to deliver their daughters and widows into the emperor's orbit. This was not the random violence of raids. It was a steady, bureaucratic usurpation of family autonomy that wore the face of legitimacy. When the messenger arrived, the villa altered its rhythms. A wax-sealed scroll was presented at sunrise, the ivory ring of the seal pressed with careful ceremony. Servants cleared rooms with trembling efficiency, while men of the household composed measured apologies they would never need to speak aloud. Fathers who had argued policy in marble courtyards found themselves fastening cloaks with hands that betrayed panic. Mothers smoothed hair and wrapped heirlooms in cloth, aware that a single piece of metal might outlast their pleas. The language of the summons left no place for negotiation. It read as both favor and demand. The trip to the Golden House erased ordinary bearings. Processions threaded narrow lanes, passed near the forum where law and commerce still pretended to govern, and then turned toward the imperial quarter, where columns and statues led into a private geography of influence. Lamps were lit in long rows, the scent of burning resin and crushed herbs filled the air. Musicians tuned behind curtains, their tentative notes threaded through the gloom like an omen. Servants guided each guest through halls laid out to disorient, every corridor trimming away memory until the world that awaited seemed to exist on the emperor's terms alone. Within the palace, ornaments and architecture performed their own intimidation. Frescoes narrated triumphs and the city's legendary beginnings. Gilded reliefs swallowed the light and returned. It sharpened. Laughter and clapping, audible through thick doors, acted as a metronome for the night. Attendants smoothed robes and powdered skin, but these efforts were not kindnesses, they were preparations for the stage. The court's spectacles resembled theatre in form, but differed in purpose. The audience was not only invited to watch, it was taught to consent to the ruler's enactments. Those selected for the most private entertainments were escorted away from the public cushions into narrower chambers where the house's tempo changed from display to containment. Night's grand banquets blurred ceremony and coercion. Nobles reclined on low benches while masked performers moved among them with practiced insolence. Wine flowed to dissolutions of judgment. Yet beneath the revelry lay a carefully engineered architecture of humiliation. Enclosed alcoves offered the emperor scenes, staged like tableaus. Women were repositioned not as participants but as props, rehearsed in posture and speech for audiences that included senators and close companions. The arrangement suggested a perverse dramaturgy because every element was orchestrated. Witnesses could mistake imposition for ritual. The ruler cultivated an atmosphere where degradation could be reframed as entertainment and compliance as honor. Once removed from the public glare, the women entered a different regime. Doors closed on corridors that smelled of cedar and perfumed oils. Attendants moved quietly and efficiently, marking routines that replaced personal choice. Meals arrived at appointed hours. Sleep was broken by the uncertain timing of demands. Garments were exchanged for robes that denoted status within the household rather than within one's own family. Mirrors, when permitted, often distorted features or were absent entirely, an absence that eroded a person's sense of continuity. The deliberate isolation severed each woman from the protective networks that might have given her counsel, legal advice, or familial comfort. Rumors threaded the palace like discreet currents. Servants traded careful tidings about who had been summoned and who had returned, altered, and even these whispers were cautious, measured by fear. Some attendants tried to mask small mercies, slipping a folded note or an extra crust of bread into a hidden place, while others bartered confidences for advancement. The atmosphere encouraged self-preservation over solidarity. Families outside the imperial residence negotiated quietly with agents and scribes, seeking to minimize loss, to preserve estates, to find loopholes. These private negotiations transformed loss into a matter of pragmatic survival rather than public protest. Isolation proved its power in silence. Cut off from council and community, the women faced a steady attrition of agency. Letters were rare, and conversations within the household were monitored. Legal recourse was a fantasy when the law itself had been repurposed to compel obedience. Sleep fragmented under the strain of waiting. Every footstep beyond a sealed door could portend another demand, another test. The days lengthened into a tautness that left little room for hope. Small gestures, an unspoken prayer, a tightened hold on a hidden heirloom, a glance toward a shuttered window, became private defiance. In such slender acts of preservation, identity persisted despite the regime's insistence on erasure. Seen together, these stages constituted an implicit system of rule by intimacy. The emperor's power did not merely seize land or titles, it annexed relationships and repurposed loyalty. By extracting women from their households and converting them into elements of stage display, the administration retooled social bonds into levers of influence. This method turned private life into public leverage, making submission a civic expectation and fear a resource. Through law, summons, procession, spectacle, and isolation, the ruler extended dominion into the most intimate corners of Rome's elite, and in doing so reshaped the structure of authority itself. Night settled over the Golden House with a softness that disguised its intent. Torches burned low along the inner courtyards, their weak flames bending in the faint breeze that slipped through open arches. Servants moved briskly but quietly, adjusting cushions, trimming wicks, and arranging trays of fruit and wine with almost ceremonial precision. Word had already circulated through the residence. The emperor intended a private performance, one reserved for a select circle of companions and advisors. Those chosen to attend understood that presence meant approval and silence meant survival. In a small antechamber, the women waited. Their names had been read earlier that afternoon, each spoken without emotion by an attendant who avoided meeting their eyes. Aurelia, Livia, Claudia, and the unnamed younger woman stood apart from one another, unified only by tension they could not voice. None knew what the evening would require, but each understood that the emperor's imagination had no boundaries. A trembling lamp cast faint shimmer over the carved walls, stretching their shadows into long, indistinct forms. When the guards entered, the room's air tightened. Their movements were carefully measured, firm without overt aggression, assertive without noise. A gesture directed the women toward the corridor leading to the inner hall. The walkway curved gently, revealing glimpses of floors inlaid with pearls and polished stone. Along the path, musicians rehearsed muted chords as if practicing for an audience that would never applaud. The music's slow rise and fall heightened the disquiet, shaping an atmosphere where even the softest note felt intrusive. The main chamber opened before them like a theatre. 2 rows of couches had been arranged in a semicircle. Nero's confidants reclined in loose postures, but their eyes betrayed vigilance. Every gesture they made, lifting a cup, nod, ding to one another, shifting their weight, was influenced by the emperor's presence. At the center of this silent congregation sat Nero himself, draped in a robe embroidered with gold threads that caught the firelight and scattered it around him like fragments of sun. His expression carried the ease of someone who expected the world to bend. With a flick of his hand, he signaled the beginning of the evening spectacle. The musicians shifted into a slower tempo, and the guards guided the women toward a low platform. Nero explained the theme with theatrical flourish. A reenactment of an ancient tale admired for its emotional intensity. Yet everyone understood the story was merely a pretext. The emperor wove his own interpretations into the narrative, bending each scene into a display that magnified his authority. The women, stripped of agency, followed the cues delivered by quiet nods or pointed glances from attendants who dared not falter. The performance unfolded with deliberate slowness. The women moved according to instructions given moments before they stepped forward, each motion calibrated to reflect the emperor's vision. Aurelia's hesitation earned a sharp gesture from Nero, prompting her to adjust her stance. Livia's steady gaze lingered too long on the floor, drawing murmured disapproval from a guard who reminded her to keep her head lifted. Claudia's trembling hands betrayed her fear, yet she forced composure, aware that uncertainty could draw harsher scrutiny. The unnamed woman complied with instinctive caution, trying to avoid drawing attention. The watchers remained mostly motionless. Their silence carried expectation and pressure, reinforcing a rule that none dared challenge. The emperor's version of art superseded dignity. The room's oppressive beauty, the mosaics, draperies, gilded statues, became a backdrop for submission, framed as entertainment. Nero evaluated each gesture, adjusting the women's positions as one might correct actors on a stage. His tone was calm, almost thoughtful, as though he were shaping a performance rather than orchestrating humiliation. As the final act approached, the atmosphere thickened. Nero requested that the women repeat a sequence of movements that symbolized loyalty in the narrative he had invented. The chamber held its breath as they complied. No cries filled the hall, no violent outbursts marked the moment, yet the weight of the emperor's gaze, the silent watchers, and the proximity of the armed guards spoke of an invisible coercion that allowed no refusal. The submission he demanded was emotional, psychological, a surrender of autonomy rather than a display of physical force. When the sequence ended, Nero leaned back as though satisfied with a successful demonstration. Applause rose hesitantly from the couches. It echoed, without conviction, a sound born from caution rather than admiration. The guards escorted the women from the platform and led them down a separate passage, one that curved away from the celebrations resuming behind them. Music swelled once more, drowning out footsteps and closing the pageantry behind a veil of sound. The women did not speak as they were guided back to their quarters. Each carried the weight of what had occurred, a performance that required them to abandon identity in order to satisfy an emperor who mistook obedience for art. The night did not end with a dramatic outcry. Instead, it dissolved into an oppressive stillness that settled across the Golden House, leaving behind a memory shaped not by spectacle, but by the quiet devastation of lives bent beneath absolute power. The truth of these nights does not survive through the voices of the women who endured them. It survives instead through fragments, lines written cautiously, passages veiled in metaphor, and remnants of art that escaped the emperor's attempt to reshape memory. Tacitus, measured and deliberate, recorded hints of Nero's nocturnal gatherings without naming the victims directly. In his account, he speaks of revels that blurred the boundaries between entertainment and coercion, employing language that shielded him from retaliation while leaving a trail for later generations to follow. His phrasing suggests a world where the emperor transformed private anguish into stage ceremony and where refusal carried consequences too grave to describe plainly. Suetonius, writing with less restraint, preserved accounts of performances in which women of standing were compelled to enact the fantasies of a ruler who believed himself a divine artist. His anecdotes, though coloured by the dramatization typical of his style, echo recurring patterns, scripted roles, enforced participation, and nobles stripped of the protection their rank should have guaranteed. Cassius Dio provides another vantage point describing how certain families dreaded imperial invitations, aware that such summonses were impossible to decline. He notes that women of prominent households were compelled to serve the emperor's pleasures, framing their suffering within the broader instability of Nero's reign. Although his histories were written generations later, they draw upon earlier materials now lost, preserving testimony that might have otherwise vanished. Material evidence also contributes to the picture. Excavations within the remains of the Golden House uncovered a fresco fragment depicting masked figures arranged in a tableau. Their postures, strained yet elegant, suggest a choreographed scene rather than Cassio. Our revelry. Some scholars believe the artwork mirrors the private spectacles Nero favored, encoding aspects of performances that imperial chroniclers hesitated to record explicitly. Letters exchanged among Rome's elite offer another layer. In one correspondence attributed to Pliny the Elder, a brief passage mourns the absence of daughters from influential households following imperial functions. The wording is subdued, shaped by caution, but the underlying grief is unmistakable. These traces reveal an unspoken acknowledgement of experiences concealed beneath official narratives. After Nero's death, the Senate issued decrees aimed at undoing policies that had enabled such abuses. The language of these reforms did not mention specific events, yet the urgency with which they restored legal boundaries indicates a desire to correct practices that had violated both custom and dignity. The absence of explicit detail speaks not to innocence, but to shame, an admission that certain truths were too painful or dangerous to preserve openly. Piece by piece, these sources reconstruct a reality that official records sought to soften. Though the voices of the women remain silent, the scattered testimonies surrounding them form a quiet chorus, revealing the shadowed machinery behind an emperor's carefully curated image. Nero's fall reshaped the city he had dominated for more than a decade. When news spread that the emperor had taken his own life, Rome exhaled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Crowds gathered in the Forum, not to mourn, but to witness the dismantling of a reign that had stretched the boundaries of obedience. The Senate moved swiftly, issuing a decree of damnatio memoriae, erasing his name from monuments and public inscriptions. Officials removed statues, altered records, and attempted to scrub the scars he left on the empire's collective conscience. For the families affected by his excesses, the transition brought no celebration. Instead, they approached the return of their daughters and widows with restrained gratitude. Some women re-entered their households quietly, carrying an air of distance that others learned not to question. Conversations were softened. Certain rooms remained unspoken reminders of absence. Mothers watched their daughters move through familiar spaces with a new caution. Fathers, once vocal in political debates, turned their attention inward, aware that their bonds had been tested in ways they would never fully articulate. A few women chose not to resume their previous lives. Livia retreated to her estate in Praeneste, restoring the gardens her husband had once tended with care. Claudia withdrew to a family villa along the coast, seeking solitude where the rhythm of waves could steady her thoughts. The unnamed woman, whose identity never entered the public record, was believed to have sought refuge in a small temple near Antium, dedicating her remaining years to quiet devotion. These retreats were not dramatic resignations, but deliberate efforts to reclaim control over their surroundings. Rome did not document their emotional aftermath. The empire kept its gaze fixed on new rulers, fresh decrees, and shifting alliances. What lingered in private? These spaces, the hesitation in a voice, the way a hand tightened around a shawl, the pause before stepping into a crowded room, escaped historical notation. The city remembered Nero through scandal and spectacle, but the echoes of the women's experiences lived in families that learned to navigate silence with care. Their stories, though suppressed by official narratives, endured in fragments passed between generations. In small, unguarded moments, these fragments preserved the truth Rome tried to bury, that beneath the grandeur of imperial power lay lives reshaped by forces no decree could erase. The corridor where Aurelia once stood remains only as a shadow in the historical imagination, its lamps extinguished, its polished tiles worn away by centuries of silence. The faint laughter that drifted through those walls has long since vanished, leaving behind an emptiness that says more than any chronicle ever dared. Power in Rome often moved quietly, and its deepest wounds were made in places where no public eyes were allowed to wander. What happened inside the Golden House did not leave scars on monuments or alter the city's skyline. Instead, it reshaped lives in ways the empire refused to acknowledge. The voices stifled within those chambers disappeared into the folds of official memory, replaced by curated accounts that celebrated festivals, victories, and imperial achievements. Yet behind those sanctioned narratives lay a darker truth, one in which families measured grief in private glances and unspoken recollections. Nero's reign ended, but the world he crafted left a mark that no decree could wash clean. The corridor, the hush of forced obedience, the echo of footsteps approaching without mercy, all remain as reminders of what happens when authority is bound only to desire. Rome tried to bury these stories, but fragments endure in the quiet spaces between recorded events, preserving the faint outlines of women whose strength was never meant to be remembered. If this story moved you or revealed something new about Rome's hidden past, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your reflections help keep these forgotten voices alive. And if you'd like to join us for more journeys into history's untold truths, you're welcome to subscribe to Eternal Historian